Maya and Derek thought the last weekend at Lake Dusk would be nothing more than a quiet farewell to summer, a chance to breathe before life pulled them back into the grind. But the lake had been waiting, patient and hungry, and as the nights grew colder, they began to realize they weren't the only ones left behind. Something moved in the silence, something that wore familiar faces, and it was getting closer. The last days of summer always carried a strange heaviness, like the air itself didn't want to let go of the warmth. I had stayed longer than most at my family's lake house, soaking up the final golden sunsets before autumn crept in. The lake was quiet now, no more laughter of children or buzzing of boats, just the still water reflecting a sky that seemed too perfect, almost staged. I told myself I wanted peace to breathe in the silence before returning to my crowded life in the city, but in truth, I stayed because something about leaving felt wrong, as though the lake itself had unfinished business with me. At first it was beautiful, even soothing. The surface of the water glistened gold in the evenings. The pine trees whispered softly whenever the wind stirred, and the air carried that smell of wet earth and cooling leaves that always meant summer was dying. But after a few days I began to notice how unnatural the silence felt. The birds that had filled the woods with constant chatter all season were gone, vanished overnight. I hadn't seen a squirrel or even a dragonfly. The usual signs of life just stopped. All that remained was a sound of water lapping at the shore and the distant creak of the dock whenever it shifted. The longer I listened, the more it seemed like the lake was breathing. Nights became heavier. The air cooled so sharply after sundown that I often woke shivering. Sometimes, I was pulled from sleep not by the cold, but by the undeniable sensation of being watched. It was impossible to shake. I would lie still under the blanket, eyes straining in the dark, heart hammering, certain that something stood just outside my bedroom window, waiting. Yet whenever I forced myself to look, all I saw was blackness and the faint shimmer of moonlight across the lake. The strangeness crept closer with small, unexplainable details. One morning I found the wooden deck outside my bedroom covered in a trail of wet footprints. They were faint, but clearly human, darker patches on the old planks, as if someone had walked straight out of the lake. They led directly to my door. But what unsettled me most was how they ended there, no trail leading away, no smudges down the stairs, nothing. Just a set of damp prints stopping inches from where I had been sleeping. I convinced myself it must have been leftover moisture from the rain, though I couldn't remember it storming. I scrubbed the wood with a towel and told myself to stop being paranoid, but the next morning they returned. Identical, same shape, same placement, wet patches glistening faintly in the dawn light. That evening I stayed outside later than usual, watching the sun sink low and bleed into the horizon. The water was unnaturally still, the kind of calm that felt staged, as if holding its breath. I sat at the end of the dock, legs dangling above the dark surface, when I caught a flicker of movement across the lake. My heart lurched. A shape tall, pale, human-like stood just at the edge of the tree line on the opposite shore. The distance made it impossible to see clearly, but it wasn't moving. It stood perfectly still, its reflection quivering faintly in the water. I told myself it must be another late summer visitor, someone who had lingered like me, but a sick unease twisted in my chest, because something about it felt too familiar. The height, the slope of the shoulders, the outline of the face, it looked like me. For several long moments I stared across the water, every nerve buzzing with cold dread. Then the light shifted, a cloud swallowed the sun, and when I blinked, the dock on the far side was empty. I left quickly, my pulse hammering as though I had been running, though I hadn't moved more than a few feet. I tried to tell myself it had been nothing but a trick of the light, my own reflection stretching across the water. That night, though, I slept uneasily. When I woke around midnight, the house was silent except for the steady creak of the dock outside, as if someone were walking slowly back and forth. My mouth went dry. I stayed in bed, rigid, straining my ears. The sound stopped suddenly, replaced by a faint dripping noise against my door. With my heart in my throat, I finally gathered the courage to check in the morning. The footprints had returned, wetter and darker this time, leading up to my bedroom door and vanishing there. Only this time, the wood beneath them smelled faintly of lake water, thick and earthy, as if the lake itself had reached inside the house to touch me. I tried to ignore the footprints, but the thought of them haunted me through the day. I kept glancing at the deck, half expecting to see the wet marks forming right before my eyes. They were gone in the daylight, baked dry by the sun, but the memory of them lingered like a shadow. I stayed close to the house, pacing the rooms, trying to convince myself I wasn't unraveling. Yet the silence pressed against me like a weight, heavier than before, like the world itself was holding its breath. By late afternoon the unease became unbearable, and I forced myself outside, hoping the fresh air might clear my mind. The lake glistened beneath the sinking sun, so calm it almost seemed solid, like glass. I stood at the edge of the dock and stared across at the opposite shore, searching for any sign of life. The woods were still. The longer I looked, the more the quiet seemed unnatural, as if the trees themselves were listening. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement on the dock. My chest tightened. Someone was standing there, motionless, exactly as before. My stomach twisted as I realized it was the same figure from the night before, the one that looked so much like me. It didn't move, didn't shift, didn't sway with the wind. It simply stared across the water. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. There was no detail to its face from this distance, but I knew, deep down, that it was mine. I blinked once and it was gone. The dock stretched empty into the water, not a ripple disturbing its reflection. For a long time, I stood frozen, my legs weak beneath me, my mind refusing to accept what I had seen. I eventually forced myself back inside, locking the door, though I knew it would do little good. Locks felt meaningless when something could appear and vanish at will. That night, I tossed in bed, sleep coming in fitful bursts. When I finally slipped under, my dreams were filled with water. I saw myself floating face down in the lake, arms limp, hair tangled and drifting like weeds. My eyes were wide open, pale and lifeless, staring at nothing. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to wake up, but I couldn't move. The water pressed down on me, heavy and cold, filling my lungs. When I jolted awake, my sheets clung damply to my skin. The smell hit me instantly, faint but unmistakable. Lake water. My throat constricted with panic as I ran my hands across the bedding. The dampness wasn't sweat. It was cold, clammy, seeping into the mattress itself. I got up and checked the floor, half praying it was just my imagination. My stomach lurched as I found a faint trail of wet patches across the wood, leading from the door to the side of my bed. It was as if someone had stood over me while I slept, dripping. The next day I barely moved from the living room couch. I kept every window closed and locked, the blinds drawn tight, but even in the dimness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The glass panes reflected faint outlines when the light hit them, and more than once I thought I saw another silhouette standing behind mine, smiling faintly as I passed. The sounds grew worse too. At first it was soft splashes out on the lake at night, like something moving through the water. Then came the dragging footsteps across the dock, steady and deliberate, but the worst were the whispers. They carried across the water, threading into my ears when I lay awake in bed. The words were too faint to understand, but the tone was unmistakable though, insistent, almost coaxing. On the third night, I tried to cover my ears, bury my head under the pillow, but the whispers grew louder, pressing against my skull, as if they were coming from inside me. Just before dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled the blinds aside and stared out across the water, desperate to prove to myself it was all in my head. The lake was still, the dock quiet, the woods beyond shrouded in mist. For a moment, I felt relief. But then, my gaze shifted downward, to the edge of the dock closest to me. A figure was crouched there, just at the water's edge, pale, dripping, motionless. Its head was tilted upward, staring into my window. Its face was mine. The house no longer felt like a safe place. Every corner seemed to breathe. Every creak in the floorboards felt purposeful, as if something was moving with me, waiting for me to slip into silence. I couldn't bring myself to look in the mirrors anymore. I caught my reflection once in the hallway and it lingered a second too long, eyes holding mine even after I turned away. It wasn't a trick of light, I knew it wasn't. There was intention in that stare, something patient and predatory. From that moment, I avoided the glass. I didn't want to see what might be looking back. The footprints grew bolder. At first they stopped outside my bedroom, but now they appeared in the hallway, dampening the rugs, trailing faint streaks of water across the floorboards. I found weeds, too, long strands of lake plants clinging wetly to the wood, curling in grotesque shapes as they dried. Each morning they were closer to the center of the house, inching further from the door. It felt like an invasion, slow but inevitable. I stopped sleeping properly. I left the lights on in every room, but exhaustion made my body heavy. Each time I drifted off, I woke with the crushing weight of water in my lungs, gasping as if I'd been dragged beneath the surface of the lake. My sheets were always damp, smelling of algae and mud. I would strip them off, replace them with fresh ones, but the cycle never ended. My bed became an echo of the water, pulling me closer with every restless night. One morning, I walked into the bathroom, and the mirror above the sink was fogged as if steam had filled the room. The air was cold, no sign of heat. My heart pounded as I reached out to wipe it clean, my hand trembling. But before I touched the glass, faint letters formed across the surface, drawn by some unseen hand. They weren't clear, more like scratches of breath, but I knew the shape of them. My name. I stumbled back, knocking into the doorframe, bile rising in my throat. When I looked again, the mirror was clear, nothing but my pale face staring back, wide-eyed and trembling. I couldn't stay in the room. I couldn't shake the thought that something wanted me to acknowledge it, to give it power by looking too long. I tried to distract myself with noise, turning on music, the television, anything to fill the silence. But no matter what played, the whispers bled through. They came from the corners of the house, from the shadows between the furniture, from beneath the floorboards. I pressed my palms over my ears until my head ached, but the voices seeped through my bones. They weren't just around me anymore, they were inside me. That night, I woke to a coldness pressing against my skin. My bedroom window was wide open, curtains fluttering gently, though I was sure I had locked it. A trail of wetness gleamed across the floor, leading straight to my bed. My chest tightened. I forced my eyes to follow the trail, dread curling through me like smoke. At the edge of my mattress, the boards sagged slightly, as though bearing weight. I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, frozen beneath the sheets, eyes straining to make sense of the shadows at my feet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the mattress dipped. The unmistakable pressure of someone climbing in beside me. My breath caught. I couldn't look, couldn't bear to see what had taken shape. I squeezed my eyes shut, but in the darkness behind my lids, I saw it any Waple's skin, hair plastered wet against its head, lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. When the weight vanished, I bolted upright, choking on my own breath. The bed beside me was empty, sheets soaked through with lake water. My reflection stared back from the black window, only this time, it didn't copy me. Its lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear, eyes bright with a hunger I couldn't name. On the floor, tangled in the trail of wet footprints, lay a clump of weeds, freshly torn, dripping. They hadn't been carried in by wind or accident. They had been left for me, carefully placed beside my bed, as though a gift from the lake itself. By now, the house no longer felt like mine. It pulsed with something foreign, a slow, steady rhythm that didn't belong to wood or stone. I heard it when the rooms went still, a faint throb like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. Every time I pressed my ear against the boards, it stopped, leaving me dizzy and nauseous, as if the silence itself had weight. I kept thinking of the lake, how it stretched endlessly dark at night, its waters swallowing all sound. It felt like the house and the lake were merging, one breathing entity, and I was trapped inside it. The air had changed too. It carried the sharp stench of rot, damp and cloying, like algae left to decay under the sun. I scrubbed every surface, opened every window, but the smell clung to me, lodged in my throat, souring every breath. I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and foul, the way stagnant water tastes when you swallow it by accident. I began to wonder if it wasn't the house that reeked, if it was me. I spent hours staring at the shoreline, searching for answers. That's when I noticed the trees looked different. The pines that framed the lake leaned inward, their branches bowing toward the water as though drawn by something. They had never looked like that before. I told myself it was just the season, that change was natural, but the sight made my stomach tighten. They weren't changing, they were reaching. One afternoon I found something half buried in the sand near the dock. At first I thought it was just debris, something washed up by the water, but when I pulled it free my breath froze. It was a piece of fabric, torn and damp, the fibers stiff with lake residue. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to my own shirt, the one I had worn only 2 days ago. My mind reeled. I searched the house, every drawer, every corner, but the shirt was gone. The piece in my hand was all that remained. I tried to rationalize it, to believe maybe I had lost it, maybe the wind had carried it away, but deep inside, I knew the truth. Something had taken it. Something had been wearing it. That night, I sat at the edge of the dock, staring into the dark water. The sun had long vanished, and the lake was a flat expanse of ink, swallowing the reflection of the moon. My chest tightened with every ripple, every faint movement beneath the surface. I leaned forward slightly, drawn by the silence, when bubbles rose up, breaking the stillness. The water parted with a soft, deliberate sound. A pale hand broke the surface, slick with algae. Fingers spread wide as it groped for air. I scrambled backward on the dock, my heart clawing its way up my throat, but I couldn't look away. The hand lingered, trembling, before slipping back beneath the water with a quiet splash. I wanted to believe I had imagined it. My brain screamed for an explanation. But then I noticed the scar, a thin, jagged line across the wrist, identical to the one on my own arm. My vision swam with nausea. That hadn't been a stranger's hand. It had been mine. After that, I refused to go near the dock again, but the house no longer gave me safety. The noises inside grew sharper, no longer whispers or footsteps. They were louder now, wet and dragging, as if something was crawling across the floor just out of sight. I heard it in the hallways at night, pulling itself closer, nails scratching faintly across the wood. Sometimes I caught the sound of breathing, shallow and wet, echoing behind closed doors. I tried not to think of what it wanted, but the thought pressed in regardless. It wasn't trying to scare me away. It was luring me closer. The final straw came when I walked past the mirror in the hallway. Against my better judgment, I glanced into it, just for a second. My reflection stood where it should, but it wasn't copying me. Its head tilted slowly to the side, a grotesque smile spreading across its face. And then, without warning, water began to drip from its hair, running down the glass in steady rivulets. I staggered back, every nerve screaming, but the dripping didn't stop. It was real, sliding down the mirror and pooling onto the floor. By the time I fled the hallway, my socks were soaked. The water smelled of the lake, heavy with weeds and decay. When I returned later, the puddle was gone. The mirror was dry. Only the faint outline of a handprint remained on the glass, pressed flat against the surface, perfectly matching my own. The last night of summer came heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. The air was colder than it should have been. the kind of chill that seeps into bone. I left every light on in the house, but the brightness didn't help. The shadows grew thicker anyway, stretching across the walls in shapes that didn't belong to me or the furniture. They seemed to twitch when I looked too long, like they were alive and waiting for me to blink. I sat on the couch, staring at the window, unable to rest, unable to breathe evenly. Outside, the lake was black and endless. No ripples, no movement, as if it had been sealed over with glass. I kept expecting to see something rise from it, and the longer I stared, the more I realized I was waiting for myself. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. I wasn't afraid of a stranger anymore. I was afraid of what I had already seen. The pale figure with my face, my hands, my clothes, the thing that looked like me but wasn't. As the night stretched on, the house grew restless. The creaks of the floorboards became rhythmic, a steady pattern of steps moving closer, circling the rooms. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but I could hear the weight in each sound. Something was walking, pacing, watching. The refrigerator hummed in bursts, and the sound joined the rhythm, like a low growl beneath the footsteps. Even the wind against the windows seemed to whisper in time. Nothing in the house was random anymore. Everything had become part of the same message. Something was here, and it was getting closer. Around midnight, I couldn't take the walls pressing in on me. I opened the front door and stepped onto the deck, drawn by a pull I couldn't resist. The night was cold, and the boards beneath my feet were slick with dampness. The dock stretched out before me, pale and endless, and I felt my body moving before my mind agreed. I walked slowly, each step echoing against the water, the silence swallowing the sound as quickly as it came. When I reached the edge, I froze. The lake was too still, too empty, and then I saw it. My reflection, staring up at me from the surface. But it wasn't a reflection. It was moving on its own, smiling faintly, eyes too wide. I stood there trembling as the water rippled around it, though I hadn't moved. Slowly, it began to rise. The surface parted without a sound, water sliding from its body in sheets as it pulled itself free. My own face, pale and dripping, stared back at me as it climbed onto the dock. Its eyes locked with mine, a knowing grin curling its lips, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. My chest tightened, my legs trembling, but I couldn't move. It stepped forward, water dripping in heavy droplets, leaving dark footprints across the wood. They were the same prints I had seen outside my bedroom door, the same trail that haunted me every morning. They hadn't been left by something searching for me. They had been left by me. The figure walked past me, brushing so close I felt the cold radiating from its body. It didn't attack, didn't stop. It simply moved toward the house, each step deliberate, each sound final. I watched as it reached the door, dripping water across the threshold, and disappeared inside. For a long moment, I stood paralyzed at the edge of the dock. The night air burned in my lungs, my mind racing in circles. My reflection was gone from the lake, the surface dark and empty. The silence pressed in on me, heavier than ever before. And then the thought came, sharp and unshakable. If it was inside the house, if it had taken my place, then what was I? Was I still alive? Or had I drowned days ago without realizing it? The dreams of water, the damp sheets, the smell of rot, clinging to me, maybe they hadn't been dreams at all. Maybe I had already been claimed. I didn't move for what felt like hours, the night stretching into something endless. The last night of summer was over, but I couldn't tell if I was the one left standing on the dock, or if I was already gone. Pulled under the lake's surface, watching through the eyes of the thing that now walked inside my house. The truth was too big to face. All I knew was the sound that came next, the creak of the floorboards inside, deliberate and steady, as if someone was pacing in my skin.